So this lecture will discuss where the term treatment integrity comes from, what treatment integrity is, why it's important, and what the elements of treatment integrity are and how they are assessed. The origins of the term and some synonyms. So the term treatment integrity comes from implementation science, which is a branch of study designed to focus on the issue of transferring the effects from controlled research settings to school or practical settings, which is the focus of implementation science. Treatment integrity as a term refers to the degree to which a treatment or intervention is implemented as intended. And really, the goal of documenting treatment integrity in research is a form of documenting internal validity. That is, a way to provide evidence that the outcomes obtained from a treatment or intervention were actually related to the intervention and not to other extraneous variables. Some important synonyms. Sometimes treatment integrity is also called treatment fidelity or fidelity of implementation, or sometimes it's just referred to as implemented as intended. All of them, however, refer to the extent to which an intervention is implemented as it was intended. Okay, so why is treatment integrity important? The importance of treatment integrity is, for our sake, outside of the research setting, more in terms of actually implementation, is to ensure that the instruction has been implemented as intended. And a consequence of documenting that instruction has been implemented as intended is that we're able to link student outcomes to instruction. If we can't actually document that what actually happened during the instruction and that instruction occurred the way it was supposed to, it's impossible really to know whether student outcomes are a result of instruction, which we would hope and expect, or if it was due to lack of treatment integrity, due to extraneous variables of any sort. So if you can't document the instruction has been implemented as intended, it's very difficult to actually establish a link between student outcomes in the classroom, in a small group setting in Tier 2, or in an individual intervention in Tier 3 to actually the intervention or instruction that was occurring. And finally, a key aspect of RTI is to determine whether or not the intervention was effective and then to make appropriate instructional decisions. Here's a table to kind of dig into that last point about actually making good decisions. So here we have a matrix that's crossing levels of treatment integrity, high and low, across outcomes, good and poor. So if we have high treatment integrity and a positive or good student outcome, it's cause to celebrate. The intervention was done as it was supposed to, the student responded as they were expected to, everything's going great. If we have a good outcome, but we find when we look at our treatment integrity data that it's weak and it's low, we might have to re-examine the intervention and we might have to modify our treatment integrity assessment so perhaps we're not actually capturing the right things in our assessment. If we have high treatment integrity and we have a poor outcome, that is, the student is not responding to the intervention, then we need to modify the intervention. However, if we have low treatment integrity and a poor outcome, we don't really know whether it's the intervention's fault or the way it was implemented, and in which case we need to actually start over and establish a better treatment integrity to make a better decision. So now let's talk about the elements of treatment integrity and how they're actually assessed. So this comes from Bumbarger, a 2014 chapter in Sonetti's book on treatment integrity. There's two broad categories of treatment integrity with a total of 4 aspects. The two broad categories are structural fidelity and process, sometimes called procedural fidelity. Structural fidelity refers to adherence and dosage, each of which I'll explain momentarily. Process fidelity relates to the quality of the delivery, that is, the practitioner's skill and preparation and ability to manage the program delivery and types of teaching techniques used, and engagement, which in this case refers to student engagement. Both of these are argued to be necessary and important aspects of treatment integrity. If we're not actually adhering to the important elements of the intervention or following the prescribed dosage, that is the frequency and number of lessons that should occur, then we're unlikely to have positive outcomes. Similarly, even if we are have strong adherence, we are following all the key components and we have proper dosage, we're implementing the intervention with sufficient frequency. If the quality of the delivery is poor and students are not engaged, those might be reasons why the intervention's not working. So let's talk about them more specifically, each at a time. Structural fidelity. This is also sometimes called surface fidelity. The key question that structural fidelity attempts to answer is, were important pieces of the intervention delivered? Aspects that are measured include program adherence, that is the key ingredients of the intervention, time allocation, which is a form of dosage, and intervention completion, that is also potentially a form of dosage, in which we're really talking about, are we actually completing the necessary sequence of lessons with the sufficient number of time and occurrences across a week or across a 6-week period? These aspects are typically measured with direct observation, with a rubric where someone's watching a interventionist work and they're checking off that they did certain key components. Could also be done with self-report data. Sometimes we calculate a percentage of the required content delivered based on direct observation and self-report. And sometimes we talk about the number of lessons or sessions, as well as the specific sequence and frequency of delivery. Process fidelity, the key question here is, how well was the intervention implemented? Now, this aspect of treatment integrity isn't always measured. However, more and more authors and researchers are arguing that this is a critical component. Aspects that are measured that relate to process fidelity include the quality of the intervention delivery and the nature and quality of the teacher-student interaction during the intervention, including student engagement. How these aspects are measured. So this is a little trickier than measuring whether key ingredients were done, which is more like a checklist. This, however, relates to some sort of subjective judgment. So sometimes we have observations of the interventionist behavior and student engagement, and sometimes in order to validate those observations, we have multiple observers watching an intervention occur, and then they come to some agreement, so that's inter-observer agreement. However, we could also use self-report data, and we might use a rubric that records certain behaviors on a continuum. So for example, let's think about student engagement. Were the students engaged appropriately? We can do that on a continuum between 0, never observed, 1, sometimes observed, or 2, always observed. And so we can create a mini rating scale and try to provide a judgment on the quality of the delivery and the nature and quality of the teacher-student interaction. So what's an acceptable level of treatment integrity or an acceptable level of fidelity? This is another area where current research has not found consensus around. Everyone agrees that the higher the level of treatment integrity, the better. However, some studies have shown that the treatment integrity may be more like a threshold at which higher levels don't actually increase the quality of the outcomes. So in other words, there may be a point at which there are diminishing returns. This probably varies due to the complexity of the intervention, the frequency in which it's occurring, so many different factors. And since we know that we're all human, and every interventionist is going to make some subtle changes to the intervention, more and more researchers are suggesting that it's a good idea to develop interventions that actually have built-in adaptations to support school personnel in sustaining the effective practice. So that is, there are certain unchangeable key ingredients, but there may be some that could be adapted or changed based on the teacher's instructional style or just kind of best judgment. So again, an acceptable level of treatment integrity, higher is better. It's probably a threshold, and it's since we know things are going to change between interventionists, it's probably a good idea to identify ahead of time which things cannot be changed and which things can be changed.
In sum, treatment integrity or fidelity of implementation is the glue that links instruction intervention with outcomes in database decision making. Without it, we can't really say with confidence that the outcomes we're seeing are due to the instruction intervention that occurred. Two important aspects of treatment integrity are structural integrity and procedural integrity. We know that treatment integrity and fidelity of implementation should be assessed regularly, and we know that more is better, but how much is enough is unclear. It's probably a threshold. In a BEA, treatment integrity, fidelity of implementation, is critical to documenting the validity of the functional relationship between intervention implementation and changes in the target skill.